Bonsoir à toutes et à tous. Au nom de la ville de Paris.
Good evening, everybody. On behalf of Karine Laurent and Mr. Anwar Mgacha, we are extremely happy to welcome you here today at the library here at the Hôtel de Ville. And this is the first cycle of the Towns for Tomorrow. And thank you very much, the embassy initiative, Norway, Sweden, Holland, to get together, Iceland, talking about cities of tomorrow. So this cycle also has shown us the initiatives which are local and gives us a remarkable opportunity to talk between Paris and other northern cities. So this cycle will take place in several places in Paris, in such libraries as well as in the historical libraries of the center, right up to the month of June and April, and in the more recent ones, Canopée, Arthur Rimbaud, as well as the Youthener Mediathèque. So the libraries here in Paris are delighted to be part of this meeting with the public so that we have the opinion of everyone here. We'll be talking of essential themes as citizens of big cities, just like renovation, inclusive space, economic transformation, as well as changes in the cities. So for the inauguration this evening, I would really like to thank the embassy, the Royal Embassy of Norway, Mrs. Martens and Ellen Jorgensen, and Christian Pagh and Alexander Cruz from Oslo, architects who helped us to set up this meeting and who have been extremely helpful to us. We would also like to thank Mr. Kjetil, Thorsen, and Mr. Moreno, who are also going to be part of this dialogue and who will be sharing their experience and expertise. Thank you also to the international delegation for its help, as well as Bibliocity, who are sponsoring us. So have an excellent meeting, and I do hope that you have plenty of fruitful discussions. Yeah.
Ladies and gentlemen, I will say some words in English because this is going to be recorded and then translated both into English and French. So we'll do it both ways. It is a pleasure and an honor for me on behalf of the Norwegian Embassy in France to be present here today at this conference on architecture and urbanization. The conference is, as was said, a result of the close cooperation between the Nordic and Dutch embassies here in France and the Bibliocité, and it is the first in a series of conferences at different libraries in the Paris area. Norway is proud to be the first one out at the library of the Hôtel de Ville de Paris. What a beautiful place. We are also proud to have such a distinguished team of panelists and moderator at the core of the conference. Director Christian Pagh from the Oslo Architecture Traedal, architect and founder of Snøhetta, Kjetil Traedal Thorsen from the Norwegian side, and Carlos Moreno, professor at the University of Sorbonne from the French side. Tonight's moderator is journalist at Le Monde, Isabelle Régnier. It's what I call a dream team. The topic of this conference is how to reform neighborhoods, or put differently, how to improve people's lives. Has Norway found the answers? Can France learn from Norway? The debate tonight will possibly reveal some answers. And if not, it will surely give us food for thought. Personally, I look very much forward to listening to the debate, and I will not keep the floor longer than necessary. I will only thank those involved in making this conference possible. Whether it is the panelists, the moderator, the Bibliocité for organizing the event, or the city of Paris for providing such an excellent venue. Thank you, and have a nice debate.
Bien, bonsoir donc.
Well, good evening. As you might have understood, the subject today of our meeting tonight is the neighborhood. Neighborhood, which is a familiar and urban area, half via media between your intimate home space and the impersonal scale of the city. It is that controllable unit on which perhaps the community might have a hold, a strategic unit to invent the city of the future, experiment with sustainable life. Cities, carbon neutral, inclusive, welcoming, pleasant. So these are concepts that you will see are extremely intermingled. Everywhere today we have this feeling that there is an inexorable loss of identity in the neighborhoods, less warmth, less friendliness, less services, and less shops. And it goes back a long way. Already in 1925, Stephen Zweig has talked about the uniformization of the world. In one of his books, he said the countries seem to be very similar one to the other. People work and live according to a single model, while all the cities seem identical. Paris is three-quarters Americanized and Vienna Budapestized. The delicate fragrance of cultures that used to make them separate are disappearing, and colors are fading very quickly. And under this layer of cracked varnish, you see the color of a gray steel-colored piston, which is the sign of the modern world and its machines. Now, after the Second World War, this kind of movement went even further. So there were these big blocks that were built during the 1930s, and they become super cemented, car-oriented to the detriment, very often, of human beings and of the community. Today, it's again something different. The city is in the hands of private interests, and the construction is going on, and this shows by the multiplication of exactly the same brands, multinationals, Zara, KFC, etc., and so forth. And with all this, there's this major movement of gentrification. At the same time, this model has reached its limits because of the climate crisis. It's quite obvious that we need to have a new contract between the city and nature. The awareness of the Anthropocene, the neighborhood is now again becoming extremely important. So a sustainable city is an ecosystem from all points of view, aesthetic, social, ecological, infrastructure, etc. And it can only be made bit by bit by respecting the vegetation where it still exists, or including it where it's possible, by repairing all the connections that were destroyed. The health crisis at least had one plus point. It showed us that we really needed to get back to self-sufficiency in our neighborhood. So it's come back into this talk, what Jane Jacobs called in her time the living city. A multifunctional city which was fed by interaction between its members in its community, and where nature played a very important role. Now, the meeting this evening is under the high patronage of Norway, and we shall therefore take advantage of that to talk about the conditions of neighborhoods in this country, which is both very close and very far from us. And we tend to feel that perhaps we have a lot to learn from it. But maybe it also has its own challenges, and which might be quite similar to the ones we have in France. So there you go, with us this evening to talk about the neighborhood and the future cities and the way in which we shall organize them. These two ideas, of course, will be shared with Christian Pagh on my left, who is the chief curator and head of the Triennale of Oslo. Its next edition will take place in September, will of course be on neighborhoods, right? Now, Christian Pagh worked in urban design and urban planning on various cultural projects. And he knows Paris really well, because he was a student here during the Erasmus exchange program. Maybe you know him too, because he was also an actor. And he played the role of the young Danish student in Auberge Espagnole, Cedric Klapisch's film. Now, next to him, we have Kjetil Thorsen. Did I pronounce your name properly? Kjetil? That is fine. That is fine. Thank you, Kjetil. Architecture and co-founder of the well-known firm Snoeta, which is responsible for the new library in Alexandria, plus, of course, the Lascaux caves and so on. They've built everywhere, China, Saudi Arabia, Norway, of course, but also here in Paris, where here in Paris, very recently, they commissioned the new head office of Le Monde Group, where I work quite regularly. And now, right at the other end of the table, we have Carlos Moreno, who is co-founder of the chair ETI, Entrepreneurship, Territory and Innovation at the IEA Paris, Paris-Sorbonne, and where he is a fellow professor. So it's thanks to you that we have this idea of the city at a quarter of an hour, which has now become the main thrust of Annie Hidalgo and her teams. So after this brief introduction, we decided to have 3 short presentations in the course of our meeting today. And maybe, Christian, you would like to begin? And once this is over, we will have a discussion amongst ourselves. And then after that, we'll open up to question answers. Over to you, Christian. Thank you very much. Thank you all very much. Thank you, the embassy and...
So I'm just going to stand up just to it feels better. So basically, as you said very beautifully in your introduction, Isabel, we're going to talk about neighborhoods. And why is a neighborhood urgent? I think in many ways you kind of opened it up really good in your presentation, but I will just show some slides to stress why we need to talk about neighborhoods and why is neighborhoods urgent. So because we don't like this, because it depresses us, because there is an immense pressure of urban production around the world. We saw China, the US and Russia, and now Oslo, basically building unattractive, inhuman, unsustainable, boring, ugly urban fabric. And then it seems to me that this, I'm afraid, is the worst of Norway, right? So it'll be better eventually, but this in a sense shows the specific image. This is brand new, so it's 2 years old in Oslo. Shows in a way, I would say, a lack of ability to consider community on, let's say, the structural level. So we see this immense production of simply of mass, you can say. I hear you build Manhattan every month in terms of simply built fabric. So how do we basically re-enable us to consider community at scale? And can we reform or form our everyday places with more intention and more skill and more humane sensibility? That's the question that we would like to address with the Triennale. Hence the title Mission Neighborhood, and with the subtitle Reforming Communities. So it plays on this double meaning of looking at one at the same time on the urban form, the details of the streets, the ways buildings are placed, the way the things look and feel, but also at the social and cultural practices that are forming these built environments and the types of functions you place. Where's the hospital or the school or the workplace or the shop or the kindergarten? Where are things placed and how are they designed? So the Triennale will basically explore this, and I'm just super happy to be here with you, Kjetil and Carlos, and we're basically on a journey that hopefully will last the next 4 years to the next Triennale, where we will basically unfold aspects of how neighborhoods are formed. What is neighborhood? Intuitively, it encompasses a doubleness. So it's physical. You say, I live in a neighborhood. It's where you go and shop or where you have your kids in kindergarten. If you're lucky, that's the same place. If you're unlucky, you commute. But this idea that it's both a very concrete place, but it's also a social horizon, an expectation. And maybe it's a very literal connectivity with people you might know. So it has different layers of scales that you also hinted at, Isabella. This kind of like doubleness of social and physical, but also this potential of community that might be actual or potential. The thing is that community can be everywhere, and we are very dependent on the most physical, mundane things. Where do I put my garbage? Where's my bike parked? Where is the place I go and take the bus? So it goes to planning for functions, infrastructure, and public space. It's how these things are intertwined that can destroy or enable a community to thrive. Of course, there are other aspects as well, cultural, social, economical issues, but these things matter in themselves and are incredibly often forgotten. So you place things stupidly in ways that makes people not connect. So we want to ask questions that comes down to the needs of every day. Where do I meet my individual needs and the social? How are they, so to say, related to each other? And how are the functional level of where do I work, where do I shop, related to, can I be a part of something? Can I change my environment? Can I have vocal ideas? Can I be a part of more than just my own privatized life? I have 2 more minutes maybe. So just a few images. So it just to make it more concrete, it has to do with form. So these are two typologies in Oslo. It's kind of more, let's say, modern. It's an awful, terrible plan, this project. There was a project I showed before, where it's quite, in a sense, obvious that it's very kind of, how do you say, unintuitive and unrooted. The spaces are undefined, and it's just in terms of community design is really just, it's awful. And I can say more about it, but I don't have time right now. But here you see in this kind of older structure, you see how you have these interior courtyards that are incredibly kind of accommodating in terms of like how they frame a community. It's still open though, so I can go with my son into this and know that it's somebody else's, and I will, so to say, respect that it's not totally public, but it's not privatized either. It's kind of this kind of intriguing mix that I think is very neighborhoodly, as opposed to this non-space up here. Edge zone, a very important thing in urbanism. How does the building meet the public space? So this building over here, for example, says "fuck you, welcome car." Where this building, that is not a particularly beautiful, or it's quite beautiful in its own modest way, but it just says the corner, just having this little shop says, "Hi, I know you are there." With this simple gesture, it makes the world of a difference. Of course, commercial activity is super important. What we see is a huge challenge of shopping centers and online shopping. How do we enable these types of small programs? This is an iconic little kiosk that sells sausages in Oslo, and it has a huge kind of impact for the way that neighborhood feels, even though it's 4 square meters and sausages. Streets, of course, are the blood vein of the neighborhood and the city. It's where life unfolds and where we go through. And there's so many bad streets. It's incredible. This is brand new in Oslo. Can it be worse? I doubt. But it can also be, look at this beautiful little scene in Bergen. Who put this out? How private and public kind of floats together. How the street now has become a site for sports, integration. It's just like that's neighborhood life for you right there, right? Just happening because of the way things has been knitted together in a nice way. A new project, centrally located in Oslo, just to show that the square, and we can do it also in modern times, be kind of attractive and in a scale that works for neighborhood life. I will end with one more slide after this, but Jane Jacobs basically unfolds the dream of the city is this ballet, where things are connected, as she writes beautifully. The art form of the city is an intricate ballet in which the individual dancers and ensembles all have distinctive parts which miraculously reinforce each other and compose an orderly whole. This bigger dance of elements is what we are trying to discuss. 3 themes, and this will be my last slides, that we are looking at in the Traedal is specifically how do we reconsider streets and public space. So let's say the outer parts of the neighborhoods. But super important is the first floor program, what's happening on the street level, How do we get more differentiation in public program and shops, etc.? And finally, we need to look at neighborhood culture and biodiversity in the cities. So I look forward to the dialogue. Thank you.
Kjetil, would you follow up?
Maintenant, Kjetil, it's your turn.
I turn it on? It's turned on, right? Thank you. And maybe make it a full one. Yes, very soon. Thank you. Oh, I feel almost, no, not almost. I feel humbled sitting in a library space like this, talking about it, because many of our projects through history have been libraries. And the density of a place like this, when it's filled with people, also is the knowledge that is included in this space, which provides us with more insight than we can read during a lifetime. So we have to be aware that we don't know everything. And in this particular connection between where, say, Paris and Oslo might be in their comparison, I cannot help thinking of how shocked we were when the 1 meter was introduced, because we could not wait to get back to the 5 meters. So you have to see that the relationship of culture and density is one of the most difficult exchange parts that you have within communities. The span between the private and the public and all the gray zones in between. I have to explain a little bit where we came from at the very beginning. Many of you will probably remember the Brundtland Commission report, Our Common Future, from 1987. It was a UN report where for the first time there was a clear understanding of social, environmental, and economical sustainability at the heart of this document. In 1987, we established Traedal based on this report. It was important for us to have an early stage ideology for why we're doing what we're doing. Then in 1989, we started subdividing this into affect, behavior, and cognition. Within all of these three, you are moving into psychology and holistic perspectives of architecture and physical surroundings. And if you don't know your ABC in psychology as an architect, you have nothing to do behind the drawing table. The social element was the first we started looking at, and where we had a really serious effort with the library in Alexandria, which was a competition we won in 1989. At that particular point in time, the infusion of neighborhoods was supposed to be solved by introduction of culture. There were many cities around the world who thought that we are going to save our cities by purely introducing cultural spaces or cultural buildings. Now, of course, it was a very positive belief, because culture in itself can replace some of the things you don't have at home. It is important for the public space. And in such sense, libraries are probably amongst the most important public spaces we have indoor, because you're not going anywhere. It's not a train station. It's not an airport. You're not going anywhere. You're going to the library. The library is a destination. So doing this library was important for us because it was reintroducing all the aspects on social thinking that we had at the very beginning. Training Egyptian workers with Norwegian aid money. Making exchange between Egyptian companies and French, Italian, English companies 50-50 to have a knowledge transfer within the building industry. To deal with contracts and pieces of architecture where you pay the workers, not weekly, but monthly, so they don't go home the week after they receive the money and only come back a week later. The monthly payment gave us a stable workforce within the library, and it created public ownership to this building. Introducing hard hats, shoes, clean toilets, drinking water on the site then became the standard for how to treat contracts with construction companies in Egypt after this building. It included very much the way you look at things and how you actually perceive them when you share architectures, when you create public ownership. Then we developed this one step further, and I'm not going to develop this very far, it's a little theoretical, but architecture is the art of prepositions. Everything is about where you have your body, where your eyes are located, where your body is located. Now, this is the Opera House in Oslo, and this is the first perception of where you are. You're on the opera roof, but you're also under the roof. You're in front of the building, behind the building. In nature, in every language in the world, all prepositions are at hand. It's only in architecture we have extremely limited vocabularies talking about where the body is. We're usually inside or outside. If we're lucky, we're in front of or behind. That cannot continue. We have to locate the body in so many other positions worldwide because everything we experience is related to where we have our ears, our eyes, our nose, our body, our feet. Finally, when we started seeing that there are possibilities within the tool of architecture to actually create certain aspects of social sustainability, we had to move into the climatic aspects of this. And CO2 with these powerhouses became positive energy buildings within smaller neighborhoods in Norway. They produce much more energy than they consume, which means over a period of 40 to 60 years, we pay back the CO2 for the construction, for the transport, and for the recycling of the building. This is how we pay back, and if not, if we don't pay back the CO2 consumption, the CO2 release that we are doing by consumption, then there is no way around it. And that's why it's so important to reuse what you have before you even consider the relevance of building something new. Reconnect in existing cities, use what you have, reuse it in different ways if you need to. This is a project in Milan, the old butcher, the old slaughterhouse of Milan, now filled with totally different elements with a full environmental circle analysis, bringing things together. This is a reinventing cities project through the EU. That's it. I'm so excited about this discussion, especially because, not to say anything, but he's so young, he still has so far to go. But this man has inspired me now for the last 2.5 years maybe, in trying to reconsider certain elements of importance when it comes to physical planning. And physical planning is never better than the thinking you provide up front. You can design yourself to death, and it can be as elegant as it wants. But if it doesn't have the relevance that you're looking for, forget it. Don't do it. Thank you.
Je vais m'élever pour voir mieux les slides d'ici. Thank you.
I hope to see the slides better. So I want to thank all the organizers and thanks all of you for being here. And I'm absolutely pleased to be in this magical place. Moreover, with dear friends about these subject matters that put us together. And I loved Eddie Jacobs, and I'm really happy to see a picture. We haven't got much time, so I would like to speak to you about the work that I am doing with my teams, the happy proximity and the 15 minutes city and the 30 minutes territory, which is its twin in a way. As we are in the heart of Paris, I think you know the left image that was the election campaign of Anne Hidalgo, who adopted this concept of polycentric city that we summed up as the 15 minutes city. But she adopted this concept in November 2019, before the pandemic, and we saw the image. Some of them Christian Pagh. So why is this concept so popular all around the world in all the languages? I'd like to go beyond the phrase, the 15-minute city. I would like to say that we really have to, the root of this concept is in climate change. First, it is COP21 that drove us to propose a new urban vision, saying that technical measures are not enough for climate change. And because cities are the epitome of mobility, my approach was maybe it's not sufficient to think about electrical vehicle, high quality. But why do we move so much? Are we doomed to such a large scope mobility? Is 70% of the people have to go to 10% of the territory? Are we doomed to have buildings that are only used for a function that is going to be occupying them for 30 or 40% of the time? Why, when people are going to work, is there so little happening in their neighborhood? And why, when people are leaving their offices, the neighborhoods of the premises are so empty? And when COVID-19 hit, the whole planet started to dream about maybe living differently, to have a more happy proximities, to use infrastructures more, to be less mobile and have more services next to their home. And we are speaking about a concept where environment, economy, and social impact are going to converge. And we want a habitable city, a bearable city, and an equitable city. We are fighting against the selection through money. How do we fight ghettos and places where I have the possibility to be happier, to have more local activities, and to create employment. And the pandemic actually showed us that we could find useful time without having to go to work and spend 2 or 3 hours per day. It is the mankind, or men and women, who are giving a different rhythm. So all these resources, material and human, are things that we can use to live better where we live. An ecology to use your bike and to walk more, solidarity more, and citizen partnership, a new rhythm for the city, a more intensive use of the building we already have. Our model of the 15 minutes city is founded on 6 things that we identified in the whole world that helps us to be happy. It is living, not to have to go and travel far, have the possibility to mental and physical health, to have a easy access to health and culture, and be able to actually stroll in good natural conditions and healthy conditions. So if we mixed the uses within the proximity, we will have a better social life with our friend, and we'll have a more sustainable planet, and we will feel better. We want to reinvent a city of multiple neighborhoods. Pascal wrote speaking about God, and he was saying God is something where it's a sphere where the around is everywhere and the center nowhere. And this is the kind of graphic that I take. And I go wherever I want, when I want. The digital help us to identify very many places that can be transformed to or for multiple use, whatever the density within the 15 minutes or in the 30 hours, we can reconstruct this territory where ecology, economy, and social connection are complementary and help us to have a better life quality. Thank you, Carlos. I think that all around this table, we spoke a bit too long. A lot of things have been said, and what I could highlight after your 3 presentations is that on one hand, we have situation of neighborhoods that are rather sad, and on the other side, we have investigation that have been made and maybe are going to give us a few answers for the call for ideas that was launched with this mission neighborhood. We spoke of happy proximity, private and public space. We spoke about culture. We spoke about reducing the transportation time. We spoke about well-being, about construction with positive energy aspect. I think, we will all have ideas about how we could live better and how we could have better neighborhoods. But I think that the questions that now raises and is quite more difficult is how do we do that? Because once we have identified for a neighborhood the flows and difficulties, too many cars, not enough mixed uses, gentrification, loss of identity. It is a question that I address to the three of you. I don't know if you have read this study that Michael Kimmelman did recently in the New York Times about this south of Manhattan project that was done after a storm that took place in 2012, where the south of Manhattan was devastated. And the city launched an initiative to actually try to think about an urban project that could protect the residents against the problems caused by climate change. The communities were consulted. It seemed very positive, and in fact, it could only highlight the differences between social classes, and the project was put to a halt, and then politicians changed. There were ecological problems, and I think that something now seems to emerge, but it took so long. So once we have put forward all those ideas, what do we need for them to be implemented? What kind of scheme, what kind of political will? Do you have any ideas?
Not answered. I can at least comment on it, because I think it is definitely the right question to ask. How do we move from ideas and maybe thoughts that most people would agree that we like neighborhoods and it's good and all that. So how to move forward? So I think the work that Carlos is doing and what we're trying to do with the Traedal is to try to be a little bit more focused on what it actually entails. And I think the fact of the matter is that most public actors, states and cities, they tend to be quite focused on what they have to do. So they build a school or maybe not a library these days, but you still build a lot of functions without actually asking yourself, what does it mean in terms of place? So hospital people are measured on how many people they can cure in a certain price. And then it's cheaper to place the hospital here rather than here. So you have a lot of, let's say, public sector actors who basically don't think about place when they take decisions. So having them think about place and developing a language of the value, which I think is what you're trying to do, Carlos, to show that there's value beyond the individual actors' understanding of value that relates to, as you also mentioned, this kind of ecology, that the way things can lift each other up in terms of synergies, just like in the forest where the bees and whatever, it's how things, so to say, flow together. But that is not intuitive. Not even in the government, and then the private sector, of course. Most private actors, they basically just obsess about their own little plot of land. They want to build as much as they can, as fast as they can, to make as much money as they possibly can. So let's say in the big actors, public actors and private actors, most of them think very little about neighborhood. And that's what they need to start doing. So we need to promote simply the terminology and the basic facts of, I mean, I would say everything you need to know basically is written in Jake Jacobs' book from 61 or whatever it is. But it's not being done. So in a sense, it is preaching things that in a way seems intuitive, but it's just not done. And I would say picking neighborhood is also, isn't it just too banal or too obvious? Yes, it is. But we still fail to do it. And I do think, and I will look forward to pass the word on, that exactly the corona situation has offered us a unique opportunity to rethink the way we do things. And that is just an opportunity we should not lose. Because suddenly we realize, what if I can do my work, maybe not at home, not traveling an hour, but what if I can work with somebody else 5 minutes away? That I think is quite attractive for most people. Working at home is boring, but losing an hour of transport is pretty attractive. So local centers of, let's say, co-working, and how nice wouldn't it be if my kids could be picked up at 3 rather than at 7? And so all these things that you promote, Carlos, in terms of getting time back is just incredibly interesting. And the value of that, can you try to measure that, or in terms of money and health benefits? Then it becomes really interesting. So I think it's a big game of building political momentum and basically educating and inspiring bureaucracies, and also, of course, private actors around the world.
Carlos, maybe peut-être vous pouvez nous expliquer. Enfin, je suis sûre que vous avez.
Carlos, perhaps you could give us your input into this. I'm sure you've thought very hard about these issues. Can you tell us about the implementation in Paris, at least? Maybe here or elsewhere, what's happening? Yeah, of course. Let me give you a few examples. That'll make it a little more clear. There's certain cities of different sizes, and so they're different. So when you're there, it doesn't matter whether it's a big city or a small city, it's just the way you use it and the services that you have there, the facilities you have there. And that goes back to this question about what sort of city are we living in? And Hidalgo said, talking about Paris, because they met in June 21 for a meeting for this 5-year program to transform the city of Paris with this paradigm that we ran into. But to give you a more concrete example of other things than how to govern a city, because when you want to build something, you must have all the commons, ecology, proximity, and citizenship. So you have to give concrete examples of each. What's interesting is the first thing that Hidalgo said was on the 1st of December 2020, after she won. And that was when she opened the schools on the weekends. This was symbolical. It's interesting because it boiled down to a lot of things. Normally schools are shut on the weekend, Saturday and Sunday. And there you go. So this is a public space, which is unheard of, But on the weekend you can use it, because normally it was just used for the education of children between Monday and Friday. So when Annie Hidalgo opened the school, she summed up these 3 elements that we talked about. The rhythm of life, you open up spaces, and that you use for something else, and so you introduce a different rhythm in life, and you use this place, this building, whatever you like, and we have a project and we run it over there. And that creates other contacts and other more sentimental feelings. And as a result, you feel that the school is more than just a place where you dump your kids and they come back after learning or whatever it is. And today it's become a way of life. And very often everyone talks about it, because this is very often in front of a school. You have an open public space in Barcelona. Just last week we had an international meeting with our colleagues from Barcelona who talked about it, because since they opened the school on the weekend also meant an improvement of the public space that was open just outside the school. In other words, all the roads around the school are now just for pedestrians. There are no cars anymore. It's a car-free zone so that you can use public space peacefully. You walk around without being hassled. So for Barcelona, they extended all that because all this public area was redeveloped. They grew trees, they greened it up, and now you have trees and benches and facilities for older people. Women can also go and sit there. They've also set up signs about all that the women have done in the past. So these are just two incidents. Let me mention something else to you. So these are just small gestures, but this is also an initiative taken by citizens and which can also have an impact all around. So we set up what we call cafes or coffee houses so that people can go there, drink a coffee, eat something, and you have this peak hour. But at other points, you know, it's a low period. Let's say you have a coffee between 4:30 and 7 in the evening, and there's nothing happening there. So there's an association called Polyglot, which goes over there, let's say 20 or 30 people. They all come with a little flag and the language they wish to speak, polyglot, which means multi-language. They spend 2 hours over there, they have something to eat or drink. The cafe owner earns a little. Plus, there's a coach being paid for by the institute and who's teaching languages to whoever is there. So there was nothing happening there. Now we are creating value, using an empty space, an economic value for that. This business model works. Plus, we are giving greater social value. We're talking about language, and it becomes a very useful space, a little language laboratory for them, which just goes to show that when you use your imagination, wow, you can do it. Now, one example is of young people in a discotheque, which is only used on Thursdays, Fridays, Saturdays, and Saturday nights, and then nothing happens in the afternoon. So you got these lots of space, a lot of equipment. So what happens is it's now being used by a coach who's paid for 3 hours for gym. You can do Zumba, you've got music. So that's local people in the local neighborhood who set this whole thing up. There's just so many more ideas that one can have. Once you reuse a private space, a public space for something else, and you introduce different activities. So that's what we wish to do, just channel them towards these points when it comes to residential areas. Sorry. Now, just this discotheque you were talking about, the nightclub. In the first place, it was schools and so on, so you need public sector to help out. But a nightclub is private, right? So how can you just walk in? It's a case-by-case exam. No, we've done that in Milan and we've done that in Buenos Aires. And in fact, I'm going there next week to talk about all this new use of space. You need to talk to the private sector to involve them so that they're willing to change the use of their venue, right? And they're not going to use it. They're going to get something out of it. What's more, it's a good economic model. In the cafe, for instance, as I told you, it's used as a school, polyglot. And it's being run in the lean hours when they have no business, whether it's for teaching languages or something else. It's a two-way thing. That's why these concepts are of great interest, not just to the public sector. Of course, you do need to have a public will and a political will, but in the private sector, you have to go and look for these kind of ideas so that these resources can be brought in to be used. With COVID, actually, we realized private partners were more and more interested than we thought, because we're giving them greater use, getting more value out of the use of their buildings. And so your relationship with private space, public space is changing. We're looking for an intersection. Each time you find a new juncture or intersection, you create value with buildings, with the outdoors, the space that's available outdoors. resources that people might have intellectually as well to share. Teaching a language, for instance, in a cafe, why not? You're using your resources. It exists in the neighborhood, but no one's really using it. Thanks to the pandemic, we use our resources. This is what we call the hidden resources or the hidden value in our city. So in my 15-minute city, we are hunting around looking for these kind of hidden resources that we'd like to reveal, bring up, and use this surface. Like, for instance, change an area into a market garden, have a cinema house, which has a lot of room, but which has just 2 or 3 shows. So you could do other things in it, make it multifunctional. If you go to the stadium here called Chongqing, it's not just a stadium, because on the ground floor you have a sort of startup for all the young sports clubs. So that's what we're doing. We're making all the investment we wish to. So let me give you some other examples. You have democratic budgets or participative budgets with the city of Paris. They spend 800,000 with us to develop ideas with citizens in the area to develop this closeness, this contact. When you do it at a larger level, at a more macro level, for instance, if you want to fight gentrification, then we must have neighborhood shops. And so the town hall here in Paris has developed a system where they have an association that buys square meters and they rent them out to local craftsmen, bakers, recycling points, etc., etc. And this is rented out at a rent which is not at all for killing them. It's subsidized. So that's why these kind of professions can exist. That's why in the past you could have people in the past. It's not for selling LVMH bags or Gucci. It's not just for the sake of selling something, but it's also to create a social contact. This is part of the community. And that's where you've got housing, social housing, which low-income housing, which is being developed and but which should also be involved in everything. We've done this in Italy and in Milan and in Scotland. We have corporate working, where you have these decentralized workplaces at different points in the city. And so they are like contact centers for people who are very far away, and they can come in there and do some co-working, let's say 20 minutes away from where they are. And once or twice a week, they can go there instead of miles out. Well, I have a question for Kjetil, please. Your experience as an architect. You make buildings and also for all neighborhoods. So to what extent does your work, well, when you're planning on a building, right? How much leeway do you have? How much influence do you have to actually make up a whole neighborhood? When we spoke about it to you, we talked about the buildings in the world, les bâtiments du monde. I don't know if your Le Monde building, it's like an arch, and behind the arch, it's you see the railway station, Austerlitz station, and you see the neighborhood, you see the Salpêtrière hospital. At the same time, this neighborhood is extremely cold, isn't it? Because it's just development, a lot of real estate development. There's no personality as such. It's just office area. It's downtown. Now, I believe in Toulon, you're working on something extremely different, where you're transforming the port area. I don't know if you'd like to talk to us about one or the other of these projects. So finally, what's the role of architects in giving life to a neighborhood, to revitalize it?
Very complex questions, obviously. But let's assume that there are certain terminologies that we agree upon when it comes to neighborhood planning. I think one of the most important really is proximity. Let me reinterpret a little bit what proximity might be. Because once you start moving within an environment and you're part of that environment, you're proximate to it, right? If you're not there, you don't know it, and you don't want to know it necessarily because you don't know what it entails. So only when you're there, you can actually create a relationship to that space. So that means when I'm sitting now on this chair in an intimate relationship here in this library is my chair. When I leave and get off the chair, it goes back to the library. So these fine-tuned relationships of proximity generates a certain push of wanting to use what you're offered. It's like boiling water. At a certain point, the pressure is too high, so you just simply want to move into spaces you don't know, you're curious, you want to use them and use them differently. So the architect's responsibility is all of this. Looking forward, much more than those who do not deal with the profession, hopefully. In German it's called Verfasser, which means you understand before the others. Hopefully. That should be embedded in the profession. So you take certain precautions. You generate proximity between jobs, people, families, surroundings, park, sports, areas. And once this proximity has reached a certain level, you will use it. Simply through the fact that it's there and reachable. And that's why the 15-minute city is such a genius stroke, because it entails all that is within proximity within your life in order for you to get in contact with it. So again, the architect's responsibility is all of this, right? Not design. Architecture is all about relevance. Design is something many people can do at different levels. It might even be subjective. It can be elegant, it can be ugly, and it can be beautifully ugly or ugly beautiful. That's not the point. The point is to get to the core of certain constellations of things that benefit human life where people are. If you don't bring that forward, you will also not get to open up the spaces. You can open a space, but nobody will use it. You don't start using it before you've been there. And this is the Nolli plan of Rome, right? Showing only the differentiation between private and public. And we've done for too long, we've been looking at indoor spaces versus outdoor spaces. We believe indoor is always private and outdoor is always public. No. Indoor can be as public as the outdoors. Simply the fact that it has a ceiling, a roof, and some walls does not limit the basic understanding of accessibility. And what we do in our buildings is try to emphasize this aspect. Again, back to, you can walk through the building. By that, you're under it, you're through it. So, you're covered by the building before you move in to the left or to the right. So all of a sudden, you've opened a space which normally would have been private, but Le Monde chose to do it public. But it's almost an interior space. All it needs is two walls on either side, and all of a sudden it's an interior space.
But is it sufficient?
It's never sufficient. It's never sufficient. So these are steps. Remember, architecture is not a revolutionary profession. It's an evolutionary profession. And we're going to fight day by day for the next 100 years to get things in order. And after 100 years, we will still not have it. So I feel it's a matter of continuous pressure to work in the right direction and get enough people to do the same with the same attitude. Look, we're talking about equity, we're talking about rights and human rights, we're talking about the way you actually produce what you're doing, and all of this in this huge complex bowl of things that we call physical planning, architecture, design, social awareness. I don't know. I don't have the answers. I really don't. All I know is that if we don't all pull in a better direction than we're doing today, it'll just get worse. So we have to at least make sure it's getting a little better.
I'd like to just, j'aimerais, juste aborder un dernier
Now,
sujet.
just one last issue before I give the floor to the public for question answers.
Un petit peu hors champ,
Now, this might be a little out of scope, or perhaps it's already been covered, considering the way we talked about the city. Anyway, since we talked about gentrification, which is both something concrete and abstract, but when it comes to neighborhoods, we talk about the old inhabitants, the historical inhabitants, and the new ones. So in other words, when you improve a neighborhood, when you make it nicer, more livable, greener, all of a sudden, mechanically, it improves in value, the rents shoot up. That's what we see everywhere. And so the poorest people are then pushed out further and further. And it's not very often the kind of people who have the flexibility or the adjustability to work at home or co-working. It's people who have to move around, they have to go to work, take transport to work, and so they finally have to go longer distances. So we can dream all of a sudden about not having to go away for more than a quarter of an hour from where we live or for all that we have to do. But that's not easy for all, it's a luxury, because there's certain areas and there's certain social categories we can't afford this luxury. So my question is, are there any means of ensuring, or is this part of your policy to limit or stop this kind of bleeding in society? Is that part of your idea of a neighborhood? Recently, I saw a project in Romainville, which was fabulous. It was about an urban farm. So beyond just growing food and vegetables, fruit and veggies, this farm gives a certain light, throws a certain light and more interest to this neighborhood. In the past, it used to be a neighborhood which was totally destroyed. It was made up of low-income housing, very ugly. And now it has a little cafe, it provides organic coffee and so on. And it's also kind of educational project because schools come in and see what's going on. Plus there's a retirement home for old people just next door, and they come too. So for once I felt this project is really improving the city and improving the neighborhood. It's not a gentrification project, it's not. It's doing good in its own way. It's doing a lot of good at the social level, finally, in society. So you can't accuse it of being a gentrifier. So is this a possibility that could be explored? Is this an avenue that one could go on, or is it just market forces?
It is a very complex question to actually, but I really thought it would have been a shame not to speak about this project. Donc, quelques points clés. C'est un collègue sociologue qui a inventé, sorry, it's a sociologist who invented the concept of word city. And she did a fascinating study about who does the city belong to, saying that the lever of local politics, in a way, had to follow the market. For instance, in London, the Qatar Emirate has more properties than the Queen of England. So it's not easy to actually change the use of the building. I mean, there are cities where the regulatory possibilities of urban policies actually are choking against, private properties. So the question we asked ourselves when we thought about the 15-minute city, we thought about the level of urban policies, the mayor of the president of the metropolis, what were the regulations we could actually take. In the United States, my colleagues say I'm a communist, and I really don't care, because we have to impose regulatory policy for the common goods, and we have common resources, and we have to make sure that everything would be accessible to everybody in order to avoid the phenomenon you were speaking about. That is, when we make a neighborhood more habitable, then humble people actually leave. When I say we, I speak about my research team. We are in favor of cities having properties, shops, places to actually have people living in it, apartments, buildings. I mean, people who live in a really nice neighborhood, for instance, or affluent neighborhoods, don't want, the people who would be having less money to come. You shouldn't be afraid. You have a real urban policy dealing with safeguarding the common good, and then sometimes, there's a separations about what is being done. So you need to actually try to work for all over the neighborhood of Les Amandiers in the 20th district in Paris has got the highest density in Europe, 38,000 people per square meter. So we have to design a urban policy that is going to think or to plan for several years. I mean, we have to actually change the local urban plan, and
Paris,
all this.
sans vouloir rentrer trop dans la polémique, mais a beaucoup vendu son foncier, beaucoup dessaisi de son
Paris,
foncier
actually, I don't want to get into a controversy, but Paris sold very much of the buildings it had, and a lot. Paris has properties that are quite important. From the 70s to the 80s, people, Paris actually put away all its inhabitants to actually have more office space. So it was absolutely stupid. So now we need to correct this. When we speak about reforming our neighborhoods, it's really here and now. We transform Osman buildings in housing building, and there were, former offices. When Osman thought about his buildings, the ground floors were meant to have service spaces, and this is what we want to go back to with our 15 minutes city. Do you want to say something?
You want to talk?
Yeah, no, thank you. I totally agree. There are a number of things that we can actually achieve with changing policies. But we also have legal representation, not only policies. And what we do know is that research comes before the legal aspects that we have to relate to. There is always a delay between the research and it actually becoming a law. We also know that there are huge lobby elements in providing us with the regulations and laws that we're dealing with today. So I feel it's more about the political will in legislation rather than relying on future lobbyist production lines when it comes to regulations. So we've seen this fight, especially in Holland, where they've actually done building code-free zones. Okay, you sign an ethical contract. And this ethical contract contains all the human rights elements, all the elements when it comes to accessibility, all the elements when it comes to climate. And you have to sign this ethical contract. And the contractor that goes in has to open they work with open books. You can look into the accounting of the project. You can see how much money they make. You're basically not allowed to make money. You're allowed to break even. And that becomes this kind of settlement of possibilities within a circular way of thinking about how legal aspects can ruin your possibilities. I can assure you, even in Paris, in Paris, I'm thrown over by French regulation. It is almost, it's almost as hard as some of the American regulations.
You think it's one of the countries where the regulations are really the most constraining?
Yes, because there are so many individual interpretations of the regulations. So you have this kind of legislation. I've never, in my practice, heard about so many discussions on fences as I have here in Paris. When everything we want to do is get rid of these bloody fences. We want to have an open key, open door policy, a keyless kind of approach to the city, where everyone can walk in and out almost everywhere, not into everyone's bedroom and bathroom. That's not what I'm saying. But everything that has a public flair, why not open it up? Because of security, because we're afraid, because we don't trust, and in the end, because somebody wants to make more money than they should on these elements. So I think we have to be extremely careful to lean in one direction of solutions. I think it is a series of almost like needle pinches to repair broken muscles, not one needle. And I think if we do that carefully, long term, and keep treating our society with just healing it slightly more and more and more, we'll get to a better place.
Christian, last word, and then après, on prendra les questions.
It's interesting that, of course, the neighborhood scale kind of touches upon macro scales and micro scales. But I think, just to answer your question with my words on the question of gentrification and let's say the money, which of course is the crazy machine that just drives everything around in weird ways. I think it's also totally possible to look at the tax system on a very kind of fundamental level. It's really interesting to see exactly how public investments like your farm or the beautiful school, how a lot of public investment actually raises the price of private property. So we actually have a lot of money paid by taxpayers going to the Qatar government or just to owners, simply because they're not taxed enough. So I think generally you could look at the tax system as kind of a meta system of redistribution of wealth that is basically being produced by the collective, but being given to the individual owner, which is weird. So communist tax system is one of the answers.
Alors, est-ce
Really get in there. Now we should not stop. Now is the time. We only have this hour.
il y a peut-être des questions.
Maybe there are questions about communism, gentrification, nature in town.
Je ne vois pas. Ne soyez pas timide.
Maybe I can make one comment meanwhile to your points before, because I think this idea of double usage is really essential to the ideas of what we can make, where we can basically also make more with less. I mean, we can simply get more with what we already have just simply by sharing it. And in a way, I think some of your work, Kjetil, for example, the Opera House in Oslo, it is almost a cliche, but the fact that you don't only get an opera, you get an opera and an outstanding public space for the same money, in a way, right? And that is possible often. And I think it's interesting that more and more people are actually understanding that we can actually have an office and give something back. And I think actually the project you referred to from the lower part of Manhattan, that big architects was involved in at a time on this project, the idea is that suddenly you look at an infrastructure project that's about securing Manhattan from flooding, is becoming a community project. Maybe not totally successful, but the fact that it's not only engineers that's sitting there, it's actually all kinds of basketball associations and endless meetings. That is in itself a good thing, though we're not quite there yet.
Oui, je disais pas que ça ne s'est pas fait. C'est juste que ça a pris très très longtemps et ça a révélé.
No, I didn't say it wasn't made. It took a long time. This is what I really wanted to say. You were saying, Traedal, Thorsen, Kjetil, that we cannot only sustain the aspect. There is something that would be a question I would like to address you, and it is about the shape. And there's something you were speaking about also, Christian. What is the role played by the shape of architecture, of urban design? What kind of importance does it have? Because we were speaking when we started our conversation, how we had to rethink our neighborhood. Do you think form is essential, is key to our quality of life?
Est-ce que la forme peut faire du bien?
Can form be good for you?
Of course, we all react to something we perceive as beautiful or less beautiful. But of course, popularly speaking, the two sides of the ass does not necessarily like the same things. So we have a series of subjective elements in a continuous changing platform of what we call beauty. So to me, it's more relevant to look at content, a very popular word, purpose, to see how beauty is portrayed through form-making issues within what you want to achieve in that particular society. Mm-hmm. So again, is the opera house beautiful or is it ugly? I don't know. To some people, it looks like a parking house. To other people, it looks like an iceberg. And it's not an iceberg and it's not a parking house. It's an opera house. So beauty, perception of beauty changes. Perception of aesthetic changes continuously through history, through all the style forms that we've seen happening throughout history. It's not a constant. Even if some people today would think that looking back in history, everything was more beautiful, I would disagree. Simply because the most beautiful thing in the world has not yet happened. It's to come. And putting that into perspective is something that is following society as we talk about the relevance of architecture. Aesthetics must, in my mind, follow the relevance of what you're doing. And then, of course, we are also pragmatic. We do what is possible, but we try to go beyond by breaking open some small cracks and then sort of going into these cracks and then maybe slowly changing attitudes. Clients are difficult, right? They want to make their money. They have shareholders, maybe not even their own money. Shareholding companies, big international companies, building construction companies, companies that make ventilation systems. You know, just to get natural ventilated space today, to fight CO2 is a problem because the ventilation companies are such strong lobbyists into the building regulations. It's a big industry. And of course, I understand the workers working for in these factories, that of course they don't want natural ventilation because they're losing their jobs. I understand.
C'est vraiment, c'est majeur, hein, c'est très intéressant. Enfin, oui, il faut comprendre ça, quoi. Okay.
But maybe one other thing to that,
Yes.
because I've been looking at the 15-minute city, and we have co-production, co-working, co-living, co-working, but we don't have co-production. And I think it's time to move the factories back into the city.
What do you mean by co-production?
The actual factory production lines. Because why did we move the factories out of and the workshops out of the medieval cities? Because they were polluting. Once we get back into production line that can actually produce energy, safe, renewable energy, and clean, why should we not bring Renault factory back into the center of Paris?
Why should we bring them back?
Because proximity. Because now we have a greenfield development of industrial areas still happening, whereas people are living in completely different areas. Still happening. Why should we have to do that today when these factories are no longer producing? When we don't need a stock because you can produce on demand? When we don't need huge areas? So I would like to see factories come back into cities.
Or the other way around would be to make great cities where there's now just shitty industrial sites. So it can go both ways, right? That simply that you don't have all these non-places that are just stocking people in production in non-place conditions.
Alors, toujours pas de questions. Si. Alors, Alors, une question norvégienne.
Oui, but
I'm not going to do it in Norwegian. I'm going to do it in English.
because when you're talking, I keep seeing some of the pictures that you were showing, these huge buildings with lots of people. And do you think that there should be a limit to how big buildings can be where people live? Now there isn't a limit to how big you can build, but should there be a limit in terms of neighborhoods and living quality?
Maybe also responding a little bit to you, Kjetil, and trying to create a little bit of a friction here. I'm probably a little bit more believing in the fact that there are quite a few things you can actually say on a general level. I don't think we are so different and things are so subjective. Maybe in terms of aesthetics, but I think there's also form that is simply more fundamental, which has to do with the human scale and the way most people like things. I don't think necessarily what you need is, let's say, a one-size-fits-all, that we can never have high buildings. I also think most people appreciate different types of places. So it's great that Hong Kong is Hong Kong with its like slender, weird towers, or you go to. So I don't think it's a question of one law, but it's more maybe an ethos, which I think is interesting in terms of this Dutch reference you had here, Kjetil, with what if every project that was ever built from today after this magnificent event here in Paris was generous. So you would demand every project would give something to its neighbor. Every tree in the forest would, be symbiotic to what's around it. I think that's the type of thinking you need. I don't think height is the problem. I don't think density is the problem. But I think the lack of attention and empathy and skill is the problem. So, and of course that's a tension that's pretty fundamental, because the two main drivers of urban production is money and law. And if there's one thing money and law like both, it's the same. They like things to be identical. It's easy for the bureaucrat, it's easy for the producer of the ventilation system. So how do you then promote detail, nuance, the little change, the little weirdness? That is why we love old Paris, because it's full of like all these small weird details made by some random guy in 1744, because it was just his building. He just made it. Anyways, that points to this kind of fundamental tension between general and specific, which is really at the heart of where quality, I believe, can be created. So no, not a regulation, but a more empathetic way of doing things through on all levels, at policy level and then down. Even non-answer.
I wouldn't mind.
Le dernier mot, last word for. No, go ahead.
No, I wouldn't mind if there is a limit
buckle
to the size of buildings, in fact. Because I think there is a parallel achievement in relationship to investment and size. And when Rem Koolhaas talks about size matters, that's exactly what he does. He says that has a long-term impact because the investment is higher. So in the end, shopping malls over 10,000 square meters forbidden. Right? So
I agree on that, but that's a function. So that,
no, it's also a size of
a
building. And there should be a smaller, even, size limit to monofunctional buildings. So you move into certain sizes. The Le Monde building is in many ways a monofunctional building, for instance, because it only contains, and some other elements. So maybe that is right at the border of a company main sort of building size. But maybe it's too big also, I don't know. But not for the number of employees. But if you have 200,000 employees and you want to build a main office for 200,000, okay, it tells itself already from the very beginning, this will not work. That's the big ring, I shouldn't be talking about these things. The big donut in this world, the big ring. The apple ring.
Yeah, the apple thing, oui. Enfin, en France, on va avoir la tour triangle à Paris et les tours Dieu aussi, qui sont des...
Yeah, you have Herzogenaurach coming up with this enormous sort of pyramid. I don't like it. I like them, but I don't like this project.
Bon, Carlos, un dernier mot ou c'est fini? Oui, bah de toute façon, je pense qu'on est arrivé au bout du temps.
Anyway, I think we've run out of time now. I'm sure you have plenty of questions, but I do hope that you were interested by all that you heard. Thank you all so much. Thank you. It was wonderful. Thank you.